An oddly quiet trade deadline for the Chicago Blackhawks as Anthony Beauvillier winds up being the only player to get dealt. And on today's episode, I'll talk about why general manager Kyle Davidson elected to stay put and not trade players like Tyler Johnson or Colin Blackwell. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's cracking, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Do me a favor, go and give me a follow on X at JackBushman2. And also, make sure to go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And if you happen to be watching this on YouTube right now, do me another favor, go and hit that like button, comment down below, subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. All of that stuff really does help me out tremendously as I'm really trying to grow the show as we begin to creep towards those summer months. And there are going to be a lot more intriguing conversations about the Blackhawks than what's going on right now. And speaking of that, a rather quiet NHL trade deadline for the Blackhawks this year, certainly compared to the last couple of seasons, as Anthony Beauvillier winds up being the only player to get dealt by general manager Kyle Davidson. I'm not going to talk about that too much here on today's episode since I dove headfirst into that yesterday. Quick plug, make sure to go and check out yesterday's show for my reaction on Beauvillier being traded to the Nashville Predators. But yeah, Tyler Johnson, Colin Blackwell, Ryan Donato, Taylor Radish, although the first two names that I mentioned, Johnson and Blackwell, were the only two guys that were really in jeopardy of getting traded, but all of them are going to remain with the Chicago Blackhawks through the end of this season. And for Johnson and Blackwell, like I said, probably the two names that could have had the most traction on the market, both of them going to be unrestricted free agents at the end of this year. So with the Blackhawks deciding to keep them, yes, they do risk both of them walking in free agency, although I kind of get the feeling that Colin Blackwell might be a good guy to bring back. I'm a little bit more hesitant about Tyler Johnson just because of the mileage on his tires and all the injuries that he's dealt with since arriving to the Blackhawks. I think Blackwell is the most likely candidate to get re-signed, but they both could walk in free agency and the Blackhawks could risk getting nothing in return for them. And I see why some people would be frustrated about that, but the reasons I believe the Blackhawks and general manager Kyle Davidson ended up staying put this year is for a couple of different reasons. First and foremost, though, I mentioned this a couple of days ago on the show, but I really do feel like the Blackhawks, I don't know how much winning they're going to be doing over these last 19 games, even though their schedule is much easier here, particularly in the month of March. I do still feel like they want to be playing a better brand of hockey and at least give them some momentum going into this summer because it's just been such a brutal stretch really since the start of December. The Hawks have lost 30 of their last 37 games, just doing a ton of losing, and it looks like it's starting to wear on the players. I don't think you want Connor Bedard to be going through those big of schneids that the Blackhawks have been going through this year. And also the I feel like the support from the fans, while people do go down to the United Center still because it is the Chicago Blackhawks, I really feel like it's almost hit rock bottom. Like the intrigue around the Blackhawks in terms of people tuning in is literally as low as I've seen it since I've been doing the show and really since I've been a fan of the team, although I wasn't there for the real dark ages. I was like 4 or 5 years old through the early 2000s. But yeah, no one is really wanting to watch the Blackhawks. I had a buddy down at the UC last weekend in their L to the Blue Jackets, and he said it was a ghost town in there. And I just don't think you want to push the fans too far. They've already taken it enough as it is. And look, like I said, I don't think the Blackhawks can really be doing that much more winning, but I do think they want to be giving them reasons to be encouraged. And we're starting to get some guys back and healthy, right? Andreas Athanasiou, Nikita Zaitsev, both could potentially make their returns tomorrow when the Hawks take on the Capitals. Connor Bedard is now stringing games together again. Tyler Johnson missed some time. Seth Jones missed some time. Those guys are just getting back to playing and being in the lineup night in and night out. So I do think the Blackhawks want to give themselves a reason to hang their heads high at the end of this year for all the struggles that they've been through so far this season. And yes, I know they want Macklin Celebrini, right? They're in the mix for him, in the mix for having the best odds, but they still have to go out there and win the draft lottery. And I just overall think they're going to be in the mix for the Celebrini sweepstakes regardless. It's all going to come down to a coin flip. So I do think they want to put together a better brand than they have over the last couple of months. And second, it didn't sound like Tyler Johnson and Colin Blackwell had too much of a market. Like depth forwards this year, there wasn't all that much interest in them. And even then, it was a buyer's market this year. So it seemed like Jack Roslovic, a player that got traded, who's multiple years younger than both Blackwell and Johnson, he only got a 4th round pick. So like we're talking about for Blackwell, probably a 5th round selection. And even for Tyler Johnson, I've mentioned there's a lot of complications in trading him due to his age, the injury concerns, and also the cap hit. The Blackhawks would have to at least retain 50% in order to move him. They might even have had to get a third party involved in order to get a deal done. And even at that point, who knows if it would have even been a 4th round pick. So I don't think Kyle Davidson really thought it was worth it. And also, the Blackhawks just have so much draft capital moving forward, right? Just in next year's draft, they have 8 selections in the first 3 rounds, so they're not shorthanded on picks. They already have a really solid prospect pool as well. So I don't think Kyle Davidson was all that worried about adding, 5th or 6th round selections. And also, as far as like the Hawks getting involved for being a third party to retain some salary, Davidson did mention in his presser here today that there was some intrigue for the Blackhawks to do that, but he just didn't think it was worth taking up one of his retained salary spots. Each team only gets 3 of them in order to take on a late round pick, which you can make an argument there. But again, the Blackhawks really have their sights set on the draft already these next couple of years. And it just felt like Kyle Davidson is more than content, which again, I think some people are going to nitpick, but the high round selections, the amount that the Blackhawks have, and you can only have so many of these guys fit into your organization, right? Like at what point is too much? And it feels like the Blackhawks are almost pushing that too much threshold. So I think all of those reasons contributed into Anthony Beauvillier being the only one to get traded this week, but it definitely was a little bit of an odd feeling not being involved and being in the midst of the chaos like the Hawks have been the last couple of years. And Kyle Davidson even said so himself. He kind of like wondered if he should be doing something different because it just wasn't as busy as it had been in years past, but he was still on phone calls. He was still doing his job. If anyone out there suggests that Kyle Davidson wasn't because the Blackhawks didn't make many moves, I think that's foolish. He just said it just kind of felt like spinning the tires. There wasn't much being built. And again, the Blackhawks didn't really feel the pressure. There wasn't really much for them to do at this point in time, especially with Foligno, Dickinson, Mrazek all signing extensions. Like those guys were going to be the Blackhawks' most attractive trade pieces. And obviously those guys resigning took them off the market. So I think all those reasons are why the Blackhawks didn't end up making moves. And I saw some people out there saying why didn't the Blackhawks go out and add pieces to help Connor Bedard these last 19 games? Come on. I mean, we're not going to give up assets to take on players for a 19-game stretch here. Yeah, we want Connor Bedard to be developing, and that is priority number 1. But we're not going to make a foolish decision by giving up draft picks or a prospect just for a 19-game stint when this team clearly isn't ready. They're not going to be playing for anything the rest of the year. And then they're going to have this offseason to go and get their pick of the litter in free agency to do just that. So settle down a little bit. If you actually thought the Blackhawks were going to be aggressive or buyers at this year's deadline, I don't really know what to tell you, but definitely much quieter than it has been in years past. Anthony Beauvillier winds up being the only player dealt as Tyler Johnson and Colin Blackwell remain with the Chicago Blackhawks. But despite this being a rather quiet deadline for the Hawks, there still were a couple of other noteworthy roster moves made here today. And coming up in just a moment, I'll talk a little bit about Boris Katchouk, my boy, getting claimed off waivers by the Ottawa Senators. But first, I got to talk to you all about Indeed. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Go and give your team the best shot right now at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed. And when you're hiring, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. So instead of spending multiple hours on countless job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all, and that is Indeed. Indeed streamlines the hiring process with their powerful tools that find you match candidates in an instant. And I personally love Indeed because it is the only job site out there where you only pay for applications that meet those must-have requirements. So make sure to go and check out Indeed.com. If you're hiring, go in, get a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. That offer is only valid through March 31st. So go and do that right now. Again, it's Indeed.com/lockedon to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. Indeed.com/lockedon. Need to hire? Then you need Indeed. Segment 2. While the Blackhawks didn't make any trades during the final day of the 2024 NHL Trade Deadline, they did have a couple of other noteworthy roster moves go down, and the biggest one, I don't know, it depends on who you're asking, I guess, was Boris Katchouk, who was placed on waivers by the Blackhawks yesterday. I voiced my feelings on that matter on the show. He was placed on waivers. It felt like he just hadn't been really seeing eye to eye with the coaching staff lately. Had been a healthy scratch a couple of times in the last handful of games, despite him having some pretty significant outings so far this season. But it felt like he just wasn't fitting in with what Luke Richardson wanted to do, and the Hawks were trying to send him down to Rockford to make him eligible to play in the Calder Cup playoffs. But nope, he got picked up by the Ottawa Senators earlier this afternoon, and his tenure with the Chicago Blackhawks has officially come to an end, which makes me a little bit sad because, like the Ottawa Senators, I saw something in Boris, and I'm going to say it again. Don't want this blown out of proportion. I know that he is a fourth liner in the NHL, but he's a fourth liner who, when he's rolling right, and consistency is an issue like it is with most fourth liners, but when he's rolling right, he can truly impact the game with his physical presence. He has some offensive abilities. He works hard. He can be a penalty killer as well. I just thought there was more of a role for him this season. And given how impactful he was certain nights compared to just some other guys who regularly play in the bottom six, I would have liked to see him get more of an opportunity. But there could have been a little bit of an attitude problem dealing with Boris. So that probably, if it was the case, didn't do him any help. But I'm sad to see him go to the Ottawa Senators, man. Part of the return for the Brandon Hagel trade a couple of years ago at the deadline, of course, played in 117 games in his couple of seasons with the Blackhawks, tallying 26 points. I know that's not anything that jumps off the charts, but I do believe that he could be an effective fourth line player. So I'm wishing Boris all the best in his stint with the Ottawa Senators. Maybe he'll get an opportunity to play with Brady Katchouk. It will be the Katchouk and the Katchouk line. Katchouk and Katchouk line, excuse me. That would be rather fun for the broadcasters to have to deal with through the course of the game. But Boris is officially gone, man. Makes me a little bit sad. But speaking of the Rockford Ice Hogs, which the Hawks were trying to get Boris down there to make him eligible for the Calder Cup playoffs. We knew Zach Sanford was already eligible based on him being placed on waivers a couple of weeks ago. That was just a paper transaction, as we've learned. He's stuck with the Blackhawks despite clearing, so he's been here the last couple of weeks. Not a surprise there. But the Blackhawks did do the same with defenseman Louis Crevier today, which I outlined on yesterday's show. I fully expected. I was curious to see if it was going to happen with Isaac Phillips, and it did. But what's curious about this happening now is usually when these paper transactions go down, these guys are immediately recalled right after the deadline passes. But in this case, Davidson told the media today that both Crevier and Phillips are going to remain with the Ice Hogs at this point in time, which I think is a pretty good indicator that Nikita Zaitsev is going to return tomorrow in Washington, because that would leave the Hawks with only 5 defensemen on their active roster if Zaitsev weren't able to play, and I don't think they want to be putting themselves in that situation. So looks like Zaitsev is going to be coming back, and this is also a nice little boost to the Ice Hogs for their final 19 games of the AHL regular season, as they've dealt with a slew of injury problems themselves this season as well. So now they're getting a little bit of added help. They're just getting Luke Philp back, who hasn't played at all this season due to an Achilles injury, and he had a little bit of a setback after as well. But now on the blue line for Rockford, check this out, what they're going to be rolling with the rest of the regular season and hopefully throughout a long run in the Calder Cup playoffs. They're going to have Isaac Phillips, Louis Crevier, who have been roommates. Those two have played a lot together. I imagine they'll probably come back down and be defensive partners once again, if I had to guess. Wyatt Kaiser, of course, is also still down there with the Ice Hogs. Nolan Allen, Ethan Del Mastro, both in their first full seasons in professional hockey. And then Philip Ruse is also there as well. So it's a pretty good looking blue line for the Ice Hogs heading into a very meaningful stretch of the season, and an opportunity for all those youngsters to be playing significant minutes in meaningful games, playoff-like environments. That's always good for development. So a little bit disappointing that Isaac Phillips is going back down to Rockford once again, but unfortunately, didn't really prove all that much in his most recent stint up with the Blackhawks. A little bit hard to do so when you're playing with Jared Tenorti every night, but it is what it is. But will be fun to see them compete on the back end for the Ice Hogs here down the stretch of the season, playing a lot of meaningful hockey, and make sure to keep stay tuned with the Ice Hogs all throughout the rest of the season, because a lot of impact players down there are going to get some good chances in some big games. All right, there are all the moves that the Blackhawks made on Friday. Coming up in just a moment. Don't go anywhere, Blackhawks fans, because I still have to talk about Landon Slaggert and Frank the Tank Nazar potentially joining the Blackhawks here in the near future. But first, I need to talk to you all about Factor meals. Eating better is easy with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to go in under 2 minutes. And you'll have over 35 options to choose from every single week, including Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto options. Also, there are more than 60 add-ons to help you stay fueled up and feeling good all day long. No matter what you're in the mood for, are you wanting pancakes, smoothies, or more? Discover a wide variety of easy options for the entire day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, midday bites, got you all covered. No prep, no mess meals. Factor makes it super easy. Their meals are ready to go, ready to eat in under 2 minutes. There's no prepping, no cooking, or cleanup needed. So head on over to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 and use the promo code LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off right now. Again, that's code LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/NHL50, LockedOnNHL50, excuse me. The promo code, it's a little confusing. It's like kind of a tongue twister. Promo code's LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off your next purchase. I also need to talk to you all about Robinhood. Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match either. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. And this offer is good right now through April 30th. So go and get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Marketing Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match and must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions, and Robinhood IRA is available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC is a registered broker-dealer. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, if you're still tuned in to this point of the show, I greatly appreciate you. Thank you all very much. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to hit that like button, comment down below, and most importantly, subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. And also, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today. because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On. Plus, our national shows covering every single league. So go check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Segment 3, an intriguing time to be keeping up with the Blackhawks prospects right now, not only with what's going on down in Rockford with the slew of high-end prospects playing there for these final 19 games and throughout the Calder Cup playoffs, but also college hockey is gearing up towards the Frozen Four and their big tournament. And also, the Big Ten tournament begins here this weekend, starting here tonight. And funny enough, Frank Nazar, Frank the Tank, and the Michigan Wolverines will be taking on fellow Blackhawks prospect Landon Slaggert, the captain of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, in a first-round best-of-3 series. And there's been a lot of talk around Landon Slaggert here as of late because the Fighting Irish, both Frank and Landon and their two teams are in a little bit of a different situation right now. But for Landon Slaggert, the Fighting Irish are the underdogs, the 5 seed in this matchup with the 4-seeded Michigan Wolverines. And if their season comes to an end after this best-of-3 this weekend, they're not likely to reach the NCAA tournament. They'd have to probably buzzsaw through this tournament in order to get in. So with that being the case, if they lose the best-of-3 to the Wolverines this weekend, Landon Slaggert would be available to finally sign his entry-level deal with the Chicago Blackhawks. And there's been some bumps in the road with signing Slaggert over the last couple of years. Had a rather disappointing last season in his junior year with the Fighting Irish. Also elected to not sign his entry-level deal with the Hawks last summer to go back to Notre Dame and finish his senior season, which at the time felt like, I don't know this to be the case for sure, but it felt like the Blackhawks weren't in love with that decision, and there was some question as to whether or not he was ever going to sign on with the Blackhawks. But at this point, seems like the two sides are working together, and whenever Landon's season does come to a close, I fully expect him to sign that ELC finally with the Blackhawks, and he honestly could be joining the team as early as the middle of next week or next weekend if they wind up losing to Michigan. And for Slaggert, it has been a huge bounce back year for him, one that he really needed to finish off his collegiate career. In 34 games this season, 18 goals and 10 assists for 28 points, been the leader on and off the ice for Notre Dame all season long. And like I mentioned, a real struggle for him last season, where he only had 13 points in 35 games and tallied just 7 goals and 6 assists. So a really down junior season, but he's responded in a big way. Sounds like the Blackhawks are encouraged from what they've seen from him over the last year and in his leadership abilities as well. So again, whether it's this weekend or whether Notre Dame continues on throughout the Big Ten tourney, whenever their season does come to a close, I fully expect to see Landon Slaggert make his NHL debut. As for my boy, Frank the Tank Nazar, the former 13th overall selection in the 2022 NHL draft, his decision isn't so cut and dry as Slaggert's, as he doesn't have any more eligibility following the conclusion of the season. Frank Nazar could potentially go back to Michigan for his junior year. After all, he did miss the majority of his freshman campaign, unfortunately, due to an injury. But he and Kyle Davidson are expected to be in communication over the next month. They're going to be having a chat and talking about the plan and where Frank thinks he is, what he wants to do, where the Blackhawks think he is, and where they want to see him grow and whatnot. That's all going to happen. But based on the progression and the numbers and how effective Frank has been this season at the World Juniors for Michigan, every level he's played at, he's been very successful and one of the best players on the ice. 36 points in 34 games this season, 14 goals and 22 assists, was a point-per-game player to help the United States win the gold medal at the World Juniors this year. Based on that, it just feels like the momentum is right for Frank to make the leap to professional hockey. It's not a sure thing. It's not 100%, but that just seems where the ball tends to be rolling at this point in time. And I know there are a ton of Blackhawks fans out there excited to see Frank the Tank finally in action. I do think Michigan, excuse me, is still, is going to make the NCAA tournament. So he could be playing hockey for a little bit longer here, but I do think the time is right for Frank to make that leap. We'll see if Kyle Davidson and the Blackhawks and Frank himself feel the same way. It also could depend on how the end of the season goes. Maybe he feels like there's some unfinished business at Michigan. I don't know. I personally think it's going to happen, but we're just going to have to wait and see until Michigan's season comes to a close. Could potentially happen this weekend if they lose to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and Captain Landon Slaggert. All right, that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe for Celebrini. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well, and that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it's uploaded to YouTube each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Go and give me a follow on X at Jack Bushman2 if you don't already. And if you're not already following my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey, I don't know what you're doing. Got some of the, not to toot my own horn, the best Blackhawks content out there. So make sure to go and give me a follow there. Until next time, I'll catch you all after the weekend. Everyone enjoy. Maybe I'll have an episode come out tomorrow. Depends on some things. It is my birthday weekend after all, so might be getting a little bit rowdy. But everyone stay safe and enjoy your weekend. I'm going to do my best to do that as well. I'll catch you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.